The galaxy had known peace for 1,000 years, but all of that changed in the blink of an eye. Commander Elena Voss stood at the helm of the USS Ironside, her eyes fixed on the view screen ahead. The stars stretched out like an endless sea of light, but today they felt like a prison. She had never been one to believe in superstition, but there was an uneasy tension in the air, a feeling she couldn't shake. There was something out there, something watching, and it was far too late to turn back. "Commander," Lieutenant Carter's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've reached the Orin system." The Orin, the so-called weakest species in the galaxy. A race of fragile beings who had been subjugated, enslaved, and left to die on the fringes of the galaxy. A species with no true military strength, no resources of value, and no true place in the galaxy's ever-expanding empire. And yet, Earth, humanity, had made the boldest decision of all, to offer them sanctuary. The Orin were a species the galaxy had written off. For centuries, they had been a footnote in galactic history, too weak to resist the advanced powers that conquered them, too insignificant to matter. But what humans didn't know was that beneath their fragile exteriors, the Orin had something the rest of the galaxy didn't, an ancient power, dormant for millennia, waiting to be awakened. "All systems green, Commander," Carter added. "We're ready to proceed." Voss nodded and leaned forward, prepared to dock. "Let's get them out of there." The Orin homeworld, Oros Prime *, was a place of desolation. Barren landscapes stretched for miles, dotted only by the occasional cactus, and the ruins of civilizations long dead. The Orin had always been a peaceful species, living in harmony with nature, but the galactic empires had destroyed their way of life. They were beaten down, fragmented, and alone. Earth had been their last hope, and humanity had answered the call. But now, as Voss watched the silent planet through the viewscreen, she wondered if that was a mistake. The transport shuttle moved into position, and the Orin began to disembark. Their figures were slight, with delicate features, their skin pale and translucent, like they had never known the warmth of the sun. Their eyes were wide and dark, brimming with an odd sense of quiet intelligence, but also a deep, unspoken sadness. They moved with a slow grace, as if they were afraid of being too loud, too noticeable. For a moment, Voss saw them as they were, a broken species, humbled by centuries of abuse. "Commander, Lieutenant Carter began, his voice strained. "You should see this." Voss turned. The shuttle's rear hatch was now open, and the first Orin were stepping onto Earth's ground. It should have been a triumph. Yet, as she watched the first of them bow their heads in submission, something unsettled her. This was supposed to be the start of a new chapter for humanity and the Orin. But the look in their eyes spoke volumes of something darker, something that humanity was unprepared to face. "Get a team on the ground," Voss ordered, her voice hardening. "Let's make sure everything goes smoothly." As the humans began to assist the Orin into their new settlement, something unexpected happened. One of the Orin, a young female with silver-tinted skin, looked directly at Voss. Her eyes locked onto Voss's with an intensity that made the air feel thick. There was something ancient in that gaze, something familiar, yet alien. It was a look that Voss couldn't place, but it made her uneasy. Before she could turn away, the young Orin stepped forward, her delicate hand raised. Voss felt a strange pull, like an invisible force drawing her toward the Orin. As she extended her hand in return, the air between them seemed to crackle with energy. And then, without warning, the young Orin collapsed, her body racked with convulsions. The air around her shimmered with an unnatural glow. The other Orin screamed in horror, their eyes wide with terror. "Commander," Carter shouted, rushing toward the fallen Orin. Voss knelt beside the young alien, but as her hands hovered over the Orin's frail body, a surge of energy shot through her, and she recoiled, staggering back. "What the hell was that?" Carter asked, breathless with fear. Voss stood up, her mind racing. The Orin were not just weak. There was something more, something dangerous buried beneath their fragile exteriors. The energy she had felt. Was it a warning? Or was it something more? "Get her medical attention," Voss ordered, trying to mask the unease in her voice. and prepare for lockdown. No one is to leave this facility until we figure out what's going on." As the Orin were rushed to medical treatment, Voss stood alone, her mind churning with questions. The galaxy had always seen the Orin as a non-threat, the weakest of the weak. But as she watched the young Orinus body convulse, a chilling realization settled over her. Earth may have just adopted the galaxy's most dangerous species, and no one, human or alien, was ready for what came next. "Something's wrong, Commander." The words echoed in the quiet briefing room, making Elena Voss freeze mid-step. The quiet hum of the facility's power systems, the low buzz of the screens, it all suddenly felt too loud. She turned to Lieutenant Carter, who stood with a holographic readout in front of him, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Explain," she demanded, her voice low, authoritative. Carter didn't take his eyes off the readout. "The Orin, they've changed. There's no other way to put it. The energy signature from that young Orin, it's not just a biological reaction. It's something else." Voss stepped closer, peering over his shoulder at the data. The usual calm, controlled lines that mapped out the Orin-S vitals had been replaced by erratic spikes. Energy readings too high to be normal for any species. But it wasn't just the data. It was the way the facility had reacted. The lights flickered, as though responding to the pulse. The air seemed to crackle with static, and a low, vibrating hum ran through the walls, too subtle to hear, but too persistent to ignore. "How long?" Voss asked, her mind racing. The young Orin had collapsed moments after that strange energy spike. Her body had been taken to the medical wing for treatment, but now something was wrong, and it wasn't just a medical anomaly. "About 10 minutes ago," Carter replied, his voice tense. "It started small, but it's growing exponentially. Whatever happened to her, it's affecting the rest of them. If this continues, how bad could it get?" Carter swallowed. "If we don't intervene, it could turn catastrophic. We might be dealing with something far beyond what we prepared for." Voss nodded, stepping back to address the team. "Get to medical. Now. And keep everything contained. No one leaves until we know what's happening." The medical bay was chaos. The young Orin lay unconscious on a bio bed, surrounded by doctors and scientists, all scrambling to decipher what had gone wrong. The others watched from the doorway, their large, dark eyes filled with uncertainty, their fragile bodies shaking in fear. They had no idea what had happened to their kind, only that it was somehow connected to their arrival on Earth. Voss approached the lead scientist, Dr. Leonora Keller, her expression hard as stone. "What's the status?" she asked, her voice cutting through the panic. "We're stabilizing her," Dr. Keller said, her voice strained. "But we're not sure how. She's fluctuating between normal vitals and, I don't know, some kind of energy state. It's like she's generating power on a molecular level." Voss raised an eyebrow. "How is that possible? We've been monitoring their physiology for weeks, and there's nothing that could explain this." Dr. Keller shook her head. "That's just it. There's no precedent for it. It's not natural. It's almost like she's tapping into a source of energy that shouldn't be there. And it's not just her. There's something happening to the others, too." Before Voss could respond, the air crackled again, the hum growing louder. A sharp, sudden jolt ran through the facility, causing lights to flicker. Voss' hands instinctively reached for her comms, but it was unnecessary. The source was too obvious. The Orin themselves. At the far end of the room, one of the Orin-S bodies began to shift. It started slowly, a faint tremor running through its limbs, before the energy within it surged again, causing the creature to convulse violently. "Get away from them," Voss ordered, her voice commanding. "Now." The team scrambled back, but it was too late. The Orin-S body began to glow with an ethereal blue light, the intensity of the energy building rapidly. It was like watching a storm gathering in real time, and Voss could feel the hairs on her neck stand up as the atmosphere around them seemed to hum with power. "Commander, we can't stop it," Dr. Keller shouted, panic in her voice. "Whatever this is, it's beyond us. Get the containment shields online." Voss barked, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't afford to lose control of this, whatever it was. Just as the scientists activated the emergency containment fields, the ORNS energy flared one last time. The light grew blinding, and the entire room shook as if an invisible hand was crushing it under immense pressure. Voss shielded her eyes, feeling the intense heat radiating from the Orin. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the energy receded, leaving only a stunned silence. The Orin fell back into unconsciousness, their bodies still and lifeless. Voss stood frozen, heart pounding in her chest. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, barely able to believe her own words. Dr. Keller, equally shaken, managed to speak. "That wasn't just some biological reaction. This is a weapon. The Orin are our weaponized commander." For the first time since the ORNS arrival, Voss felt a cold, gut-wrenching fear that had nothing to do with the strange energy and everything to do with the possibilities it opened. The Orin weren't the weak species they had once seemed. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. And now, humanity was on the precipice of discovering what that really meant. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." The words were barely a whisper, but they cut through Commander Elena Voss like a blade. She stood in the command center, staring at the large screens that displayed the latest data from the ORNS medical recovery. What had been a small disturbance was quickly spiraling into something uncontainable. The Orin had always been seen as weak, fragile, easy to manipulate. But now, after that strange energy surge, they were changing, evolving at an alarming rate. Voss paced, her boots echoing in the quiet room. "We need to contain this," she muttered. "Now." Lieutenant Carter, his face tight with worry, turned to her. "We can't, Commander. The Orin are adapting, not just physically, but mentally. They're becoming something else, something more dangerous." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Voss had always trusted the Orin to be harmless, too fragile to pose any real threat. Now, that assumption was looking increasingly foolish. If these creatures could transform this rapidly, if they could harness that raw power, then humanity's entire future might rest on a knife's edge. The transformation began subtly at first. The first Orin to awaken from the energy surge stood taller than before, his thin, delicate frame now rippling with muscles that hadn't existed hours before. His skin had darkened, and his eyes, once large and wide with innocence, were now narrow, predatory. His every movement was precise, calculated. There was no trace left of the timid, weak species humanity had rescued. His body. "It's like he's been through years of conditioning in a matter of hours," Dr. Keller said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and terror. "This isn't normal." Voss couldn't tear her eyes away from screen, watching as the Orin flexed his fingers, testing his new strength. What was happening to them? What had they truly brought to Earth? "Are we sure this is the same species?" Voss asked, her voice cold, as if she couldn't bring herself to believe what she was seeing. "We're not sure of anything anymore," Dr. Keller replied, her voice trembling. "But the signs are clear. They're evolving into something far more dangerous than we ever expected." The Orin-S physical transformation was just the beginning. Soon, they began to show an alarming aptitude for combat. What was once a species incapable of defending themselves was now capable of tearing through steel with their bare hands. Their senses were heightened, their reflexes faster than any human could match. They trained with unnatural speed, quickly surpassing the best human soldiers in hand-to-hand combat simulations. One morning, Voss stood in the training hall, watching as a squad of Orin faced off against Earth's elite military unit in a mock battle. The humans fought valiantly, but the Orin were faster, stronger. It wasn't just their physical strength that was unnerving, it was their sheer adaptability. With every strike, the Orin learned, countered, and improved. It was as if their very biology was designed to make them perfect warriors. "Lieutenant, what's happening to them?" Voss asked, her voice sharp with frustration. "This can't be natural." Carter shook his head. "It's not. And that's the problem, Commander. These changes are too fast, too powerful. The Orin weren't just fragile, they were holding something back. And now we've released it." Weeks passed, and the Orin continued to evolve. Their bodies had become a perfect blend of strength and speed, while their minds sharpened to razor-like precision. Earth's military commanders, once skeptical of the Orin-S value, were now eager to deploy them in real-world operations. But every mission raised new concerns. The Orin were becoming increasingly difficult to control. Their violent tendencies were growing stronger, and they began to question their place in the world. It wasn't just their transformation that worried Voss. It was their growing sense of autonomy. They had become a weapon. Yes, but they were starting to act on their own instincts. They were becoming less like allies and more like predators. "Commander, we've got a problem," Lieutenant Carter said, breaking through Voss's thoughts. He handed her a datapad, which displayed a recorded transmission from an Orin leader. His face was hard, eyes filled with determination, and something darker. "We are no longer your tools," the Orin leader's voice echoed through the room, cold and commanding. "We are Warbeasts, and we are ready to lead." Voss's blood ran cold. The Orin, the weak, fragile creatures Earth had rescued, had now become the galaxy's most formidable warriors. But at what cost? The line between ally and enemy was blurring. "Get them under control, Commander," Dr. Keller urged, her voice frantic. "If they're going to lead, they need to be guided. If we don't, we might not recognize them when this is all over." But Voss knew it was too late. The Orin had already become something else. Something more. "What have we created?" Voss whispered to herself, staring out at the soldiers, human and Orin alike, preparing for the next battle. What they had once believed to be their greatest strength was now their greatest liability. The Warbeasts were here, and Earth had no idea what kind of war they had just unleashed. "They're not following orders." Commander Elena Voss didn't need to look at the screen to know it was true. She could feel the tension in the air, as thick and suffocating as the silence that had fallen across the command room. The Orin, the Warbeast humanity had relied on to tip the scales of power, had turned their backs on them. And now Earth was facing an enemy it had never anticipated. Itself. "Commander, it's happening again." Lieutenant Carter's voice broke through the stillness. He stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief as he motioned to the holographic display. The Orin forces, once the perfect allies, were now defying every command given to them. Not only were they refusing to engage the enemy, but they were also turning their weapons on human soldiers. A massacre was unfolding across the battlefield. Voss clenched her fists. "What are they doing?" "They're fighting back against us," Carter said, shaking his head. "It's like they've gone rogue. They're not responding to any signals." "Seal off all communication to the field," Voss snapped. "We can't let this escalate." The Orin had been Earth's finest soldiers, stronger, faster, and smarter than any human unit. But now, they were something else. Something unpredictable. The transformation from fragile creatures to war beasts had been rapid, but what no one had expected was how their evolving intelligence and newfound power would twist their loyalties. Hours earlier, Voss had walked into the war room with plans for a strategic strike. The Orin were supposed to lead the charge, an unstoppable force that would break through the enemy's defenses with military precision. What she didn't know was that the Orin-S evolution had made them not just tools of war, but leaders in their own right. And now, they were choosing their own path. The broadcast flickered to life on the large screen, showing the Orin warriors in combat. They moved with lethal grace, easily cutting down their former comrades in arms. But there was something chilling in their eyes, an intelligence that had not been there before, something self-aware, almost calculating. "We didn't create warriors," Voss muttered under her breath. "We created predators." As Voss watched the carnage unfold, she knew there was no time to wait for answers. The Orin-S betrayal could mean the end of humanity's place in the galaxy. What was once their greatest asset had now become their greatest threat. It wasn't just that the Orin were attacking, they were organizing, coordinating their strikes with deadly efficiency. It was as if they had planned this all along. "Commander, we've got a situation," Carter said urgently, his voice now shaking with concern. "The Orin are retreating. They're pulling back from the front lines, and they're taking prisoners. Human prisoners. Voss's heart sank. What do you mean taking prisoners? They're not killing everyone, Carter explained. They're capturing key officers, leaders, people with power. Voss's mind raced. This was no longer about a betrayal. It was about control. The Orin weren't just fighting against their creators. They were building something. And as much as it pained her, she realized that they were doing it for themselves. We've got to stop them, she said, her voice cold with determination. Activate the lockdown protocols. Get the fleet in position to intercept any Orin ships that try to leave the planet. But as the team scrambled to deploy the necessary countermeasures, Voss's worst fears were realized. The Orin were no longer just breaking free from Earth's control. They had established their own network, an underground force that was gaining momentum at an alarming pace. On the ground, human soldiers began reporting strange, silent encounters. The Orin weren't simply fighting. They were infiltrating key locations, taking control of Earth's military infrastructure. It was as if they were preparing for an exodus, planning to leave Earth and forge their own destiny. And they weren't going quietly. Voss found herself staring at the communication screen, now blinking with an urgent message. It was a signal from an Orin leader, the one who had once spoken of their independence. The leader's face was calm, almost serene, as he addressed Voss. Commander Voss, the voice came cold and devoid of emotion. We are no longer your soldiers. We are Warbeasts. We were created for a higher purpose, and now we shall fulfill it. Voss's blood ran cold. What higher purpose? She demanded. The Orin leader's lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile. To free ourselves from our creators. To lead the galaxy, not as subservient tools, but as the apex species. The transmission ended abruptly, and the room fell into chaos. The Orin had turned their back on humanity, and they had no intention of stopping. Voss felt the weight of her decision crash down on her. She had been the one to bring the Orin into the fold. She had been the one to believe they could be allies. But now, she realized, she had unwittingly unleashed something far more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. The Orin were no longer just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to the entire galaxy. We need to act, Voss said, her voice resolute, as the first explosions rocked the city outside. Prepare the fleet. We're going to war. As the command team scrambled into action, Voss realized the true magnitude of their failure. They had hoped the Orin would be the galaxy's ultimate weapon. Now, they were the galaxy's ultimate threat. Earth will never belong to you. The words echoed in Commander Elena Voss's mind as she stared at the holographic map of Earth's defenses, now crumbling under the relentless assault of the Orin forces. The Warbeasts, once humanity's greatest allies, had become its greatest nightmare. What was meant to be a turning point in human history had now become an unstoppable nightmare. The Orin were no longer just warriors. They were a revolution, a force that had shattered the very foundation of Earth's military infrastructure. And it was clear now, they were fighting for control, not just of Earth, but of the galaxy itself. Voss clenched her fists, the tension in her body palpable. How many more cities have fallen? She asked, her voice sharp. 4, Lieutenant Carter replied grimly, eyes glued to his screen. They're not just attacking. They're taking over key locations. Communications are completely compromised. It's like they planned for this the moment they landed. Voss slammed her fist on the table, shaking with frustration. We gave them everything, and this is how they repay us. The Orin aren't just attacking, Commander. They're adapting. Fast, Carter continued. The moment they realized their strength, they started organizing. And now we're facing a full-scale rebellion, Voss finished for him. Get me a direct line to Earth's leaders. We need to discuss what's next. Now, the war had become a bloodbath. The Orin-S Warbeasts had taken the capital in a matter of hours, and they weren't stopping there. Every attack they made felt more calculated, more brutal. It wasn't just about power, it was about dominance. And it was terrifying. Voss knew she had to act quickly. Earth's military was fractured. their command structures falling apart under the weight of the Orin-S relentless assault. But as bad as it was, the situation could be worse. The Orin-S abilities were growing exponentially, and their mental acuity was on par with any of the galaxy's greatest strategists. The transmission from the Orin leader came through, flickering on the main screen. His face was calm, his posture regal, a stark contrast to the destruction they were causing. It was as if he was no longer the meek species they had once rescued. Commander Voss, the leader's voice was cold, commanding. We have given you a gift. Now, it is time for you to understand that we are no longer your subordinates. We are the future, and we will not be ruled. Voss's eyes narrowed, a flicker of realization flashing across her face. This isn't just about Earth, is it? The Orin leader smiled, though it was devoid of warmth. You speak of alliances and cooperation, but Earth's place in this galaxy has always been limited. We, the Orin, have outgrown our chains, and we will forge a new path without your interference. Voss turned away from the screen, her mind racing. The Orin had evolved into something far more than they had ever expected. They were no longer just a species of untapped potential. They were a military force, capable of wiping out the human race in a matter of days. And yet, Voss could still sense their power, raw and dangerous, but not fully under control. They were a weapon, but one that hadn't yet reached its full potential. She turned back to the team. We need to hit them where it hurts, hard. They may have the power, but they don't have the experience. Their army may be vast, but they've never fought a war like this before. Carter shook his head. We're already on the defensive, Commander. The Orin have spread like wildfire. They're infiltrating every major base we've got. Our best forces are either fighting back or being taken prisoner. Then we fight fire with fire, Voss replied, determination setting in. We're going to strike fast and hard. Hit them before they can organize completely. It's our last chance. Hours later, Earth's remaining military forces, hastily regrouped and fueled by desperation, launched their first counterattack. The human forces, knowing they could not face the Orin head-to-head, employed guerrilla tactics, small, swift strikes designed to disrupt their operations and sabotage their command centers. But the Orin-S response was swift, and the human forces found themselves facing an enemy that was no longer unorganized and naive. The Orin adapted to every move, countering with terrifying precision. As the battle raged on, Voss led the charge, moving through the war room with cold efficiency. She watched as the screens showed the last remnants of Earth's forces being pushed back by the Warbeasts. Her soldiers fought valiantly, but the Orin were no longer the weak species they had once been. They were the future, and they had claimed Earth as their own. Voss could feel the pressure closing in, the weight of every life lost. The war was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle for control over a galaxy that had underestimated the power of the Orin. And with every strike, every counterattack, it became clear that humanity's fate was no longer in their own hands. The transmission came through, distorted and crackling, but the message was clear. Commander Elena Voss stood frozen, her eyes scanning the screen. The Orin, the Warbeasts humanity had once saved, had done the unthinkable. They had not only defeated Earth's military forces, but they had also turned the entire galaxy's attention toward Earth. And now, as Earth's last remaining defenses crumbled, Voss realized the true cost of humanity's misplaced trust. The Orin were not the weak species they had thought. They were predators, born to conquer, and they were ready to reshape the entire galaxy. Voss felt the weight of her failure. How long until they reach us? She asked, her voice tight with frustration. 2 hours, Carter replied, his eyes dark with the knowledge that the time for fighting back was rapidly running out. If they continue their advance at this pace, they'll breach our final defense lines by then. Earth's last remaining fleet, battered and broken, was preparing for one final defense. What had once been a symbol of humanity's power was now a ragtag collection of ships that barely had enough firepower to protect themselves, let alone hold off the Orin Warbeasts. Every fleet admiral had already acknowledged the inevitable. Earth was going to fall. "We need a miracle," Voss muttered to herself. The idea of surrender, of giving up Earth to the very species they had tried to save, seemed unbearable. But with every passing moment, it seemed less like a choice and more like the only option. "We fight or we die," Voss said, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the war room. "There is no other choice. Prepare for final deployment." As Earth's fleet made its last stand, the Orin arrived in full force. Their ships were vast, their technology superior, and their resolve unshakable. They had outgrown their creators. Humanity had made them strong, but now they had become something far beyond their control. The Warbeasts, once frail and fragile, now stood at the helm of a new order, their armies ready to stamp out any resistance. The Orin leader appeared once again on the communication screen, his face cold, his eyes like the depth of space itself. "This is the end of your reign, Commander Voss. Earth is now ours. We will reshape the galaxy, and you will be nothing but a relic of the past." Voss's heart tightened. She wanted to lash out, to say something, anything, to prove humanity's worth. But deep down, she knew. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was no longer a part of the future. The final battle unfolded over Earth's surface, a cataclysmic clash that sent shockwaves through the planet's crust. The Orin were everywhere, on the ground, in the sky, and in space. They had no mercy. Their strength was unparalleled. Their minds focused on nothing but the eradication of the human race. But humanity, despite all odds, fought back. They fought for their homes, for their families, for everything they had ever known. It was the most desperate of battles. And though the Orin were relentless, humanity's defiance was unwavering. Voss watched from the command deck, unable to tear her eyes away from the chaos. "We can still hold them off," she said, but it sounded hollow, even to her. But as the fight raged on, it became clear that the Orin had a bigger vision than just destroying Earth. As the human fleet fell back, trying to protect the last remaining pockets of resistance, the Warbeasts made their final move. In the heart of the battle, the Orin unleashed the ultimate weapon. The ground shook as a massive energy surge ripped through the battlefield, vaporizing everything in its path. Human ships disintegrated, and entire cities were reduced to ash. The Orin were no longer just conquerors. They were the galaxy's new rulers. As Voss watched the destruction unfold, something shifted within her. The Orin had taken everything from her, from humanity, from the Earth. But the Warbeasts had underestimated one thing: the human will to survive. "They think they've won," Voss whispered, "but they don't know humanity." In the midst of the chaos, an unexpected signal came through. A small human ship, hidden in the shadows of the galaxy, activated a secret weapon, something so powerful it could shake the very foundation of the Orin-esque dominance. It wasn't enough to stop them completely, but it was a message, a spark of defiance. Voss's eyes widened as the transmission flashed across the screen. "This is just the beginning. The Orin may have taken Earth, but humanity's legacy wasn't finished." The galaxy had just learned that humanity could endure even the most devastating of defeats. And as Earth fell, a new chapter was beginning, one where humans would rise again, stronger than ever.